The first thing I did aboard the conclave of unbroken memory was knock over the Vethon High Elder's ritual offering bowl, and in my defense, nobody told me it was load-bearing to the entire diplomatic proceeding. My name is Yoon Ji-soo. I am, officially, a cultural attaché, third class, for the Terran Diplomatic Auxiliary. Unofficially, I am the person they send when the situation is weird enough that a real diplomat would file a complaint just for being asked. The Vethon had specifically requested a human representative of no significant political consequence. My supervisor, Ambassador Reyes, had forwarded me the request with one line of commentary. Congratulations, Yoon. The Vethon conclave ship was enormous in the way that only things built by civilizations who've had 10,000 years to get used to the idea of enormousness can be. It didn't look like a warship or a freighter or anything with a practical purpose. It looked like someone had taken a cathedral, decided that wasn't impressive enough, kept going for 4 more cathedrals, and then wrapped all 5 in a shell of bioluminescent coral that breathed. I had stared at it from the shuttle window for 11 minutes before the pilot gently asked if I was going to disembark. I'm calibrating, I told her. The Vethon delegation has been waiting 20 minutes. I'm calibrating quickly. The receiving hall smelled like the inside of a forest on a planet where the trees had opinions. The ceiling was alive, some kind of photosynthetic membrane that pulsed in slow, deep greens, and the floor was covered in low, cushioned platforms, arranged in concentric rings. In the center of the innermost ring sat 3 Vethon, tall, motionless. Their bodies a geometry of folded limbs that shouldn't have been comfortable, and probably wasn't the point. The eldest of the 3, identifiable by the pale filaments that drifted from their collar like smoke that had decided to stay, was the High Elder Setheveth. I had studied the briefing files for 6 hours. I knew the proper greeting. I knew the prescribed distance for initial approach. I knew the ritual exchange of the vessel of shared patience, a small ceramic bowl of luminescent liquid that I was supposed to accept with both hands, hold for 1 count of 3, and return without spilling. What the briefing files did not cover was that the cushioned platform nearest the vessel of shared patience had a slight forward tilt, or that my boots were apparently not rated for bioluminescent moss friction coefficients, or that when I reached for the bowl, I would instead achieve a kind of slow-motion catastrophic stumble that ended with ceremonial tea distributed fairly evenly across my jacket, the platform, and the hem of Setheveth's ritual vestment. There was a silence. It was the kind of silence that has weight, gravitational pull, the kind of silence you could measure in atmospheres. The 2 younger Vethon, I later learned their names were Thivalith and Oranu, went entirely still, in the particular way that I would come to understand meant we are processing something that does not fit our model of events. Setheveth looked down at the spreading stain on their vestment with an expression that, on a human face, would have meant, I have lived 900 years, and I have not, until this moment, seriously considered violence. I'm so sorry, I said. Setheveth looked at me for a long moment. Their filaments had gone very still. You are, they said, in a voice like the bottom note of an organ, the Terran attaché. Yes, the Terran Diplomatic Auxiliary sent you specifically. That's correct. To represent your species. Also correct. Another silence. Thivalith made a small sound that I couldn't classify. Setheveth studied me the way you study something that has fallen from a shelf, with the quiet, exhausted patience of someone who already knows the ceramic is broken and is just taking inventory of the pieces. We were told, Setheveth said slowly, that humans are unpredictable. We are, I agreed. But usually in bigger ways than this. This is actually pretty small scale for us. Their filaments moved. I had no idea what that meant. I filed it under Find Out Later, Survive Now. A replacement vessel will be brought, Setheveth said at last. You will sit. You will not approach any ceremonial objects without guidance. A pause. You will also tell me why the Terran Auxiliary has sent a representative of, as specified, no significant political consequence to a convocation that has not included a non-Vethon observer in 400 years. I sat down on the least tilted platform I could find and reminded myself that I had survived weirder openings than this. That was technically true. I just couldn't remember any right now. I'm asking myself the same question, I said honestly. The filaments moved again. This time, I was almost certain it meant something other than contempt. I decided to call it a provisional win, and take it. Vethon, I discovered by the second day, experienced time the way a glacier experiences a Tuesday thoroughly, deliberately, without any particular urgency about what came next. The conclave of unbroken memory had been convened, according to Tivaleth, to discuss the ongoing encroachment of the Preth Confederation into contested border systems. Ongoing apparently meant spanning 2 centuries. Discuss apparently meant engage in a structured oral tradition of lament and formal inquiry lasting no fewer than 31 sessions. A session lasted between 6 and 14 hours. Attendance was not optional. How many sessions have there been? I asked Thiveleth on the morning of day 2. They were my assigned liaison, younger than Sethavith by several centuries, which still made them extremely old, and assigned to me with the energy of someone who had drawn the short straw and was being professionally gracious about it. This is the 4th, Thiveleth said. So we have 27 more. At minimum. I did the math. Then I did it again, hoping I'd made an error. I hadn't. Thiveleth, I said carefully, I need to tell you something about human beings, and I need you to understand that I'm telling you this as a warning, not a threat. Their filaments shifted curiosity. I'd started to think, proceed. We're not good at waiting. Like structurally, we evolved chasing things across open plains for days at a time, and the neurological reward system never fully updated. When we're not doing something, our brains start looking for something to do. And what they find is not always. I searched for the diplomatic word. Contextually appropriate. Thivaleth considered this. You require activity. I require activity, or I will make activity. And the activity I make will probably be weirder than whatever activity you assign me. They did not believe me. I could tell, because they were Vethon. And the Vethon had been the preeminent civilization in this quadrant for 8,000 years, and nothing in 8,000 years of preeminence had given them a reference point for what boredom does to a species that spent its formative evolutionary millennia running things down. By the afternoon of day 3, I had mapped 17 structural irregularities in the conclave ship's ventilation system. I had also reorganized the supply manifest for my guest quarters, which was not, technically, a manifest, just a storage arrangement. But I made it a manifest. Taught myself 12 words of Vethon from the translation matrix, and spent 40 minutes trying to determine whether the photosynthetic sealing membrane responded to specific light frequencies. It did. I discovered this, by accident, using the beam of my pocket torch. The sealing turned a startling orange for approximately 4 seconds before returning to green. The problem was that a Vethon cultural aide walked in during the orange 4 seconds. Her name, I later learned, was Orveth, and she was responsible for maintaining the membrane's ritual light cycles, which I had just interrupted for the first time in 60 years. She stood in the doorway and looked at me holding the torch and the orange ceiling and then back at me. I was testing a hypothesis. I said, "What hypothesis?" That the ceiling responds to light frequency modulation. Why did you need to know that? I thought about it. I didn't, specifically. I was just curious. Orveth reported the incident to Thivaleth. Thivaleth reported it to Sethaveth. Sethaveth requested a meeting with me that afternoon, which cut into the 5th session by 40 minutes, and caused what I was told was a historically unprecedented procedural recess. Is it true, Sethaveth asked, with the patience of someone managing a natural disaster through sheer dignity, that you disrupted the membrane cycle through voluntary inquiry? I didn't disrupt it intentionally. I was curious about the mechanism. You were told the membrane is ceremonial. I know. Understanding how something works, Sethaveth said carefully, does not require touching it. With respect, I said. For humans it kind of does. Their filaments stilled completely. The two other elders in the room, Thivleth and an older Vethan, I hadn't met, exchanged a look that I was becoming increasingly able to read. It meant, the Terran has said something that should be wrong but isn't. You are a dangerous species, Sethaveth said at last. Not as an accusation, more as a fact being filed. Most of the time we're just enthusiastic, I said. It comes out the same way. Sethaveth was quiet for a long moment. Then, we will assign you a task, a small one, something to occupy your... The filaments moved in a way I hadn't seen before, running down prey neurology. I'd genuinely appreciate that, I said. Fair warning, though, I'm good at tasks. I tend to finish them, and then come looking for more. They looked at me like I had said something mildly apocalyptic, which, in retrospect, I had. The task they gave me was archival. Someone had to cross-reference 400 years of conclave session records against the Preth Confederation's territorial filings to identify inconsistencies in the border claims, a job that had apparently been stalled for 60 years because the Vethan archivists found the Preth documentation system philosophically offensive and refused to engage with it. It was tedious, granular, and required exactly 0 physical action. I finished it in 11 hours. Thivalith stood in the archive room doorway, staring at the completed analysis on my tablet screen the way you stare at something you put down and can't find and then discover directly in front of you. This is complete? Mostly. I flagged 43 anomalies. 12 of them look like genuine territorial falsifications. The Preth filed the same survey coordinates under different designation codes across 3 separate treaty epochs. The other 31 are probably just documentation drift, but you should have a legal specialist confirm. You have been working for 11 hours. I stopped twice. Bathroom, once. Meal, once. This analysis was expected to take, Thivaleth said slowly, several sessions. I can slow down, if that's more comfortable. They stared at me. Then they took my tablet, very carefully, like it might be structurally unstable, and left the room. I went to find the kitchen. The crisis happened on day 6, in the middle of session 7, and it had nothing to do with archives. One of the conclave ship's secondary atmosphere processors developed a cascade failure in its pressure regulation matrix. The Vethan technical term was something that translated roughly as, the machine is having a Nashen argument with itself and losing. The backup systems engaged, which slowed the problem without stopping it. The primary engineering team began a formal diagnostic procedure. The formal diagnostic procedure, Thivalith explained to me with barely restrained alarm, would take approximately 14 hours. How long before the pressure differential becomes a structural problem? I asked. At current rate of progression? Between 9 and 11 hours. So you're about 3 to 5 hours short. Yes. I asked Thivalith to take me to the processor. They looked uncertain. You are a cultural attaché. I'm also a human being, which means there's about a 70% chance I took something apart as a child and put it back together wrong the first time and correctly the second. Take me to the processor. The pressure regulation matrix was, once you got past the outer housing, a system I understood in principle, even if the Vethan engineering idiom was unfamiliar. The hardware was elegant in the way that things built by a species with 10,000 years of practice are elegant. But it was also built for Vethan engineering logic, which was sequential, ceremonial, one step follows another, in a stately procession. The problem was that the cascade failure had jammed 2 processes in a loop, each one waiting for the other to complete first, and the diagnostic was trying to address them in order because that was how Vethan systems were designed to be fixed. You need to interrupt both processes simultaneously, I said. The chief engineer, a Vethon named Suraveth, looked at me with the kind of professional offense that doesn't need words. The system architecture does not permit simultaneous interruption. Processes must be addressed in sequence. Right. But the sequence is the problem. They're locked on each other. You need to break both locks at once, or breaking one just lets the other one complete and reinitiate the loop. That is not how the system operates. I know. That's why it's broken. Suraveth and I looked at each other. They were 900 years old and had maintained Vethon systems for most of that. I was 34 and had once fixed a spacecraft toilet mid-flight using a stylus and 2 pieces of electrical tape. Neither of us was obviously more qualified for this moment. If you interrupt both processes incorrectly, Suraveth said, the pressure matrix collapses in under a minute. And if I interrupt them correctly, the loop breaks and your engineers can address each process in sequence, like they're supposed to. Can you interrupt them correctly? I looked at the system. I looked at my tablet. I ran the numbers twice, found an error, corrected it, ran them again. Yes, I said. Probably. Probably, Suraveth repeated. In my experience, that's a better margin than you currently have. There was a moment, one of those moments where everyone in a room is doing the same math and arriving at the same uncomfortable answer. Then Suraveth stepped back from the console. I did it in 40 seconds. Both processes dropped. The loop broke. The pressure regulation matrix began a normal restart sequence, and the numbers on the display started moving in the right direction. Suraveth looked at the display for a long time. Then, they looked at me. Probably, I said, is usually enough. They didn't respond. But they didn't have to. The way the filaments at their collar moved slow, careful. The way you move when you're revising something you thought you understood said it for them. Day 8. Suraveth asked me to walk with them. Not as a diplomatic formality. Just walk. The conclave ship had a garden level. I hadn't known this because no one had mentioned it, and I'd been spending most of my non-session hours in the archive room, which had started to feel like mine in the way that any space feels like yours once you've been caffeinated and irritable in it long enough. The garden was on the outer hull ring, a long, curved corridor where the bioluminescent coral was densest and the air had a different quality. Heavier. Richer. Like the air knew it was being watched. We walked for a while without talking. I was getting better at Vethon silences. This one felt deliberate rather than pointed. How old is this ship? I asked, because the silence had a shape that invited a question. The core structure is 2,300 years old, Suraveth said. Sections have been added, repaired, grown. It is not the same ship it was, but it is the same ship. Like a person. Their filaments moved the slow, curling motion I'd started to associate with something more than curiosity. Something closer to interest. Yes. Like a person. A pause. You fixed Suraveth's processor. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Suraveth's team fixed it. I just interrupted a loop. My time. You interrupted it in a way that the design did not account for. A way that should not have worked under the system's own logic. The system's logic was the problem. Yes. Suraveth stopped walking. The coral on the wall beside us pulsed. Slow. And blue. We have encountered many species. Some build well. Some fight well. Some navigate. Some mediate. Some endure. Each has a character, a weight, a way of being. The filaments stilled. Humans are spoken of mostly as a footnote. Young. Loud. Briefly interesting. I waited. I have been reconsidering the footnote, Suraveth said. We've been trying to tell people, I said. Nobody listens. You say that without resentment. I say that with a lot of resentment. I've just had 34 years to get used to packaging it. Setheveth made a sound low, resonant that I had never heard from a Vethon before. It took me a moment to understand what it was. It was a laugh. Not a human laugh, but functionally the same thing. "There is something I should tell you," Setheveth said, when the sound had faded. "The reason this conclave was convened. The formal purpose is the Preth border dispute. But there is a secondary matter. A matter that has not been shared with the auxiliary, or with any human government." A pause. The Preth Confederation is not merely encroaching on contested borders. They are preparing a claim of existential dominion over 12 inhabited systems. 6 of those systems contain Vethon colony worlds. 3 contain worlds belonging to species under Vethon protection. They turned to look at me directly, and I had the full weight of 900 years of practiced communication, making sure I understood what came next. 2 of them are human. I stopped walking. "The claim," Setheveth continued, "will be filed in 11 days. Under Galactic Concord law, an existential dominion claim gives the filing party the legal right to pursue settlement by any means, including removal of prior inhabitants, if it goes uncontested for 90 days. The Vethon have contested Preth territorial claims for 2 centuries and have not been able to assemble a coalition response of sufficient political weight. The filaments drifted. We invited a Terran observer to this conclave because our archives indicated that humans, in situations of existential threat, do not behave in ways that political weight alone can predict. You wanted to see us under pressure. We wanted to understand what you are before we decided whether to tell you that your home colonies are on a list." I stood there in the coral corridor with the bioluminescent light going slow and blue around me, and thought about 2 human worlds full of people who didn't know they were 11 days from being legally classified as a problem to be removed. I thought about my supervisor's email. "Congratulations, Yoon." I thought about the archive analysis I'd done in 11 hours that was supposed to take several sessions. I thought about the pressure loop I'd broken because sequential logic wasn't working, and you needed to do 2 things at once. "The Vethon have been filing formal objections," I said. "Coalition building, legal frameworks, sequential steps, for 200 years. And it hasn't been enough." "No." I looked at the coral on the wall. Then I looked at Setheveth. "Then you don't need more formal objections," I said. "You need someone willing to break both processes at once." Their filaments moved in that slow, curling way. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I was not reading it as curiosity, or amusement, or the careful patience of a civilization managing a minor inconvenience. I was reading it as hope, which was either very good news or the worst possible thing I could have told a 900-year-old alien standing over a list with my people's names on it. Probably both. In my experience, those usually came together.